It's a big question. You look around and all you see are us, Homo sapiens. One species of humans spread across the entire planet, but it wasn't always this way. For most of our history, we shared the Earth with other kinds of humans. They were our cousins, not our ancestors. They walked, they talked, they hunted, they loved, and now they're gone. All of them. So, what happened? The simple story we tell ourselves is that we were smarter. We had the bigger brains, the better tools, the killer app of language. We walked out of Africa, and everywhere we went, the other humans just faded away. We outthought them, outcompeted them, and won the planet. It's a neat story. It makes us feel special. But the truth is, a lot messier, and it's a lot more interesting. It's less of a simple victory and more of a long, complicated, and sometimes sad family drama. To really get at this, we have to meet the neighbors. The most famous, of course, are the Neanderthals. For a long time, we pictured them as dumb brutes, hunched over, hairy, carrying a club. A caricature. That picture is completely wrong. It's an insult to their memory. Neanderthals were incredibly successful. They thrived in Ice Age Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. That's a run far longer than ours so far. They weren't just surviving, they were masters of their environment. Their brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours. Size isn't everything, of course. The wiring matters, but it tells you they weren't simpletons, they were expert hunters. They took down massive prey, like mammoths and woolly rhinos. You don't do that by being stupid and running at them with a stick. It takes planning, cooperation, and a deep understanding of your world. You have to know the animals, the seasons, the terrain. Their toolkit, what we call the Mousterian industry, was sophisticated. It wasn't just crude rocks. They could take a core of flint and expertly knock off sharp, useful flakes. They made spear points, scrapers for hides, and cutting tools. These tools were effective and well made. They served them well for a very long time, and they had a culture. They had a world beyond just food and shelter. We have strong evidence that they buried their dead. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal was laid to rest in a shallow grave. The pollen found in the soil suggested he might have been buried with flowers. Now, that specific idea is debated. Maybe the pollen blew in, but the fact of the burial itself is significant. Burying the dead means you have thoughts about life and death. It implies grief, respect, and maybe some kind of belief system. Or you don't do it unless the person matters to you in an abstract way. It's not just disposing of a body. They also cared for their sick and elderly. We found Neanderthal skeletons with healed injuries that would have been crippling. One individual at Shanidar, the old man, was in his 40s, which was ancient for the time. He was partially blind, had a withered arm, and walked with a painful limp. He couldn't have hunted or kept up with the group on his own, yet he lived for years with these disabilities. That means someone was feeding him, protecting him, and helping him. That's compassion. That's a complex social bond. That's humanity. They even seem to have had a sense of beauty. We found eagle talons with cut marks that suggest they were worn as jewelry. They used pigments, like ochre, a red mineral, probably to paint their bodies or belongings. In a cave in Spain, we found markings and colored stalagmites that predate the arrival of Homo sapiens. It looks like Neanderthals were making art, so let's be clear. Neanderthals were not dumb. They were tough, intelligent, and socially complex people. They were a different kind of human, but they were human in every way that matters. Thinking we simply outsmarted them is doing them a huge disservice, and they weren't the only ones. Out in Asia, there was another group we've only recently discovered, the Denisovans. We know much less about them. For a long time, all we had was a tiny finger bone and a couple of big teeth from a cave in Siberia. But from that tiny bone, we got their entire genome. DNA is a powerful thing. What it told us was astounding. These Denisovans were a distinct branch of the human family tree. They were more closely related to Neanderthals than to us, but they were their own people. And their genes tell us they were widespread. We find traces of their DNA in modern people from Southeast Asia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. This means they must have lived all across Asia, from the cold mountains of Siberia to the tropical islands of the south. We don't know what their tools looked like, or if they buried their dead. We don't have a good picture of their faces, but we know they were there, and we know they were successful enough to spread over a huge continent. They were another intelligent human species adapting to a vast range of environments. They weren't a failed experiment, they were a success story. Then there's Homo erectus. The Great Traveler, these were some of the first humans to leave Africa almost 2 million years ago. They spread across Asia and parts of Europe, and they stuck around. Homo erectus as a species existed for more than 1.5 million years. Think about that. Our species, Homo sapiens, has been around for maybe 300,000 years. We are a blink of an eye compared to their long, slow reign. Were they as smart as us? Probably not in the same way. Their brains were smaller. Their tools, the Acheulean hand axes, were beautiful and effective, but they stayed remarkably similar for over 1 million years. This suggests a kind of cultural stability or maybe stagnation that is very different from our own constant innovation. But to call them a failure is ridiculous. Surviving for over 1 million years across multiple continents is the definition of evolutionary success. They mastered fire, they were probably the first great hunters, they laid the groundwork for everything that came after. They proved that a human way of life was viable on a global scale. And there were others too. On the Indonesian island of Flores, there was Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit for its tiny size. They stood about 3 feet tall. They were likely descendants of Homo erectus, who got stranded on the island and over thousands of years shrank in size. This is a common phenomenon on islands called island dwarfism. Their brains were tiny, about the size of a chimpanzee's. By the old, bigger brain is smarter logic, they should have been primitive. But they weren't. They hunted, they used fire, and they made stone tools. They survived on an island with giant rats and dwarf elephants. They show us that there wasn't just one path for human evolution. It wasn't a straight line leading to us. It was a bushy tree with lots of different branches, each one a different experiment in how to be human. So the world was crowded. For tens of thousands of years, when our ancestors, Homo sapiens, started to move out of Africa, they didn't enter an empty world. They entered a world full of other humans. They met Neanderthals in the Middle East and Europe. They met Denisovans in Asia. They might have even run into the last of the Homo erectus in Indonesia. What happened when they met? This is the heart of the mystery, and this is where the "we outsmarted them" idea comes from. There is some evidence to support it. Around 70,000 years ago, something changed for us. Some call it the cognitive revolution. Our behavior became much more complex, much more modern. The tools we made became more varied and sophisticated. We didn't just make flakes, we made long, thin blades. We invented new things like spear throwers, which let us hurl spears with much greater force and accuracy. We started using bone, ivory, and antler to make needles for sewing clothes and fish hooks for catching new kinds of food. Our technology started to innovate at a much faster pace, but the biggest change was probably symbolic. We started thinking in abstracts. We started creating art all over the world. From France to Indonesia, our ancestors crawled deep into caves and painted stunning images of animals on the walls. They carved little figurines of people and beasts. They made jewelry from shells and teeth. This wasn't about survival, this was about meaning. They were creating a shared world of symbols and stories. And the engine for all this was likely language. Not just the ability to say, "Look out, a lion." Other animals can do that. We developed the ability to talk about things that aren't there. We could talk about the past, we could plan for the future, we could talk about ideas, about spirits, about social rules, about who was whose cousin. This is our superpower. This kind of language allows for a new level of cooperation. You can organize a hunt with a complex plan. You can build larger social networks. You can trade with people you don't know personally based on a shared understanding of value. You can create shared myths. A shared story, whether it's about a creator spirit, a nation, or a corporation, can unite thousands of strangers. Neanderthals probably lived in small, family-based groups. Homo sapiens started to build tribes, and eventually, cities. Our social world was bigger and more connected. So, yes, in this one specific way, we might have had an edge. Our minds were perhaps more flexible, more innovative, more networked. While a Neanderthal group might have been stuck with the knowledge of its 20 or 30 members, a sapiens group could be part of a network of hundreds, sharing ideas, technologies, and genes over long distances. If one group invented a better spear thrower, that idea could spread. It created a kind of collective brain. This was a powerful advantage. But was it the whole story? Almost certainly not. The world is rarely that simple. The disappearance of the other humans was probably a death by 1,000 cuts. Our cognitive skills were one of those cuts, but there were others. Think about our biology. We were a tropical species born in Africa. As we spread out, we were more versatile. We were generalists. We could eat a huge variety of foods, large animals, small animals, birds, fish, shellfish, plants, roots, nuts. Neanderthals, on the other hand, were highly adapted to cold climates. They seem to have been specialist hunters of large game. That's a great strategy when large game is plentiful, but when the climate changes, and it was changing constantly during the Ice Age, being a specialist is risky. When the herds of mammoth and bison disappear, the specialist starves. The generalist just finds something else to eat. Our adaptability was a key survival skill. Then there's the simple matter of numbers. Some models suggest that even a small demographic advantage for Homo sapiens could have been decisive. If our groups had slightly more babies, or if our children had a slightly better survival rate, our population would grow. Over centuries and millennia, even a 1% or 2% advantage is unstoppable. We might have simply replaced the Neanderthals by slowly, steadily, and peacefully outbreeding them. We just filled up the landscape, and their populations became smaller and more isolated, until they eventually winked out. We also have to consider the role of climate. The last ice age was not one long, stable period of cold. It was full of wild, rapid climate swings. Temperatures could plummet or soar in the span of a few decades. This would have put immense stress on all human populations. It would have disrupted food sources and forced people to move. Perhaps we were just better at handling that instability. Our larger social networks might have acted as a safety net. If your group's hunting grounds failed, you could fall back on relatives or allies a few valleys over. The more isolated Neanderthal groups might not have had that option. Maybe they weren't outsmarted by us, but by the climate. We were just the lucky ones who were better equipped to weather the storm. And then there's the darker side of the story. We are not always a peaceful species. We compete. We fight over resources. Is it possible we killed them? There is no clear archaeological evidence of a widespread systematic war between sapiens and Neanderthals. We don't find battlefields with piles of mixed skeletons, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Violence can be small scale, a fight over a prime cave, a conflict over a hunting territory. A few dead here, a few dead there. Over thousands of years, this low-level conflict could have pushed Neanderthal populations into less desirable areas, stressing them and contributing to their decline. It wouldn't have been a blitzkrieg. It would have been a long, slow squeeze. We might have also brought diseases. When populations that have been separated for a long time meet, they exchange pathogens. We came from Africa, carrying tropical germs that Neanderthals and Denisovans would have had no immunity to. They may have had their own diseases that affected us, but it's possible we gave them the worst end of the deal. A new epidemic sweeping through their already small populations could have been devastating. So you have a perfect storm, a new human population, us, spreading across the globe. We have some cognitive advantages, more innovative technology, and larger social networks. We are more adaptable generalists. We might have a slightly higher birth rate. We are moving into a world that is already being rocked by severe climate change. We are competing for the same food and land, and we might be carrying deadly new diseases. You put all of that together, and suddenly the disappearance of the other humans doesn't look like a single event. It looks like a slow-motion collapse pushed along by many different factors. We weren't the single cause of their extinction. We were just the final crushing weight on a system that was already under incredible stress. But there's one final twist to this story, and it's the most profound one of all, discovered in just the last decade or so. We didn't just replace them. We didn't just kill them or outcompete them. We had children with them. The proof is in our DNA. If your ancestry is from outside of Africa, you have Neanderthal DNA in your genome. Or about 1 to 2% of it. It's not a lot, but it's there. It's a ghost of an encounter that happened tens of thousands of years ago. A sapiens met a Neanderthal, and they saw each other not as enemies, not as alien species, but as partners. They had a child, and that child was raised in a sapiens group and passed those Neanderthal genes down through the generations all the way to us. And this didn't just happen once. It happened many times in many places, and it wasn't just Neanderthals. People in Melanesia and Southeast Asia carry a significant amount of Denisovan DNA, up to 5% in some populations. This paints a picture of a world where these different human groups met and mingled. There were walls between them, but those walls were leaky. This changes everything. It means the other humans didn't completely disappear. They were absorbed. Their lineage didn't die out. It flows within ours. The story of our expansion was not just one of replacement, but also of assimilation. We are, in a very real sense, a hybrid species. The genes we inherited from them were not just junk. Some of them seem to have been useful. Some of the Neanderthal genes in us are related to our immune system, helping us fight off diseases found in Europe and Asia. Others are related to skin and hair, perhaps helping us adapt to northern climates with less sunlight. A particular Denisovan gene helps Tibetans live at high altitudes. We didn't just take their land, we took their genetic survival kits. Our ancestors got a biological head start by mixing with the locals who had already been adapting to these environments for millennia. So, did we outsmart every other human species? The answer has to be no. That's the wrong question. It frames it as a contest, a simple IQ test that we won. The reality was so much more complex. Were we different? Yes. Our capacity for symbolic thought and large-scale cooperation was likely a game changer. It allowed us to adapt, innovate, and expand in a way no human had before. It was our defining advantage. But the Neanderthals and Denisovans were not failures. They were intelligent, successful humans who thrived for immense stretches of time. Their downfall was a result of a complex interplay of climate change, demographic pressure, competition, and maybe disease and violence. We were a huge part of that pressure. We were the invasive species, and our success wasn't just due to our own brilliance. It was also helped by their bad luck and by the biological gifts we received from them through interbreeding. The story isn't one of a superior species marching to inevitable victory. It's a story of a world full of different kinds of people, all trying to survive in a time of great change. One branch of that human family, ours, happened to have the right combination of skills, adaptability, and luck to make it through. But we carry the legacy of the others within our very cells. They are a part of us. We are the last ones standing, but we stand on the shoulders of a lost world of our cousins. We didn't so much win the game as we were the only ones left when the game was over. And it's humbling to remember that our survival was never guaranteed. We are an accident of history, the last remnant of a once diverse human family.